All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to Diabetes Talk. I'm your host, Charlie O'Connell. We are broadcasting live and direct from the GLUCOSEZONE studio here in New Haven, Connecticut. I want to do a huge shout out to everyone around the world who just joined us for that awesome workout. That felt great. And guys, if you haven't joined us yet for one of our live workouts before these talks, I highly, highly encourage you, get in the GLUCOSEZONE with us. You're going to feel great. You're going to join a community of people that are taking back control of their life and taking control of diabetes. And it is great to see and hear from everybody, okay, that's with us. So on that note, I want to shout out several people. Claudette, who was just with us 15 minutes ago, kicking butt, doing the workout. Claudette, you did a great job, and it's great to have you here for Diabetes Talk. Sue722, I see you here on Instagram, and it's great to have you here on Instagram. Mark has joined us on YouTube in GLUCOSEZONE. Lorraine has joined us. Eva, Elizabeth, it is great to see you here, Eva, on Facebook. Kate Walton, Mom Dukes is with us. Mom, it is great to have you here. It's fun, guys. Sometimes it's fun connecting with your mom on Facebook. And of course, guys, live in the GLUCOSEZONE app. Veronica, I see you. And Veronica, I saw your workout in GLUCOSEZONE, and you did a great job, okay? And we talked a lot about understanding metabolic pathways. And Veronica, the fact that you had already started at such a great number is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. So I really want to encourage you guys, if you haven't downloaded GLUCOSEZONE, the app yet, download GLUCOSEZONE if for no other reason to understand how to capture information related to your diabetes. Okay. Also want to do a shout out to Lorraine. Lorraine, it is great to have you here too on Facebook. And mgrap1, is that Mike Grappone? Mike, is that you? Sometimes it's funny, guys, to know who these Instagram names are. So if that is you, Mike, it's great to see you. If not, mgrap1, it is great to have you here. All right. Whew. Today's topic, such an important topic, reading food labels. Oh my God, I cannot tell you how much frustration, anxiety, confusion I personally went through in terms of understanding how to read food labels, understanding food and nutrition. And it's confusing, all right? And sometimes it's purposefully confusing. So tonight's topic is really about helping you to navigate through the food labels themselves, really, really identifying what's relevant for you, okay, what's relevant for diabetes, and then talking about some common things that trip people up, okay? And of course, guys, we want to be answering all of your questions. And I want to hear your comments too, because I know we have several people on the line. Hint, hint to my mom, who, guys, my mother is an expert in nutrition. She has been helping people for literally decades get better nutrition in their life. So I want to be encouraging you guys, if you have information to share with the group, please share it, all right? Let's start off with going to some established resources. So the first thing I always want to encourage you guys is anytime you have a question about anything, go to Google. Google is probably the most incredible invention in human history. It is the key to unlocking knowledge about anything. So that would be the first step, is just literally going to Google, and you'll find some great resources right off the bat. We started off with the American Diabetes Association because that is a good one, number one, and two, is a very familiar resource. So the first thing the American Diabetes Association recommended when it came to reading food labels is looking immediately at serving size. And this is a great suggestion, because if you purchase a drink, and I'll use this glass as an example, if this glass has 4 servings in it, that means you have to multiply whatever is in the nutritional information by 4. And that is one of the most common ways that people get confused and basically misread food labels. So, give you some common examples. Arizona iced teas. Arizona iced teas, I'll use my favorite because I really like half and half iced tea, half lemonade, half iced tea. So when you look at an Arizona iced tea, it will tell you the carb count. And usually it's anywhere between 20 to 26 grams of carbohydrate. But then you look at the serving size in those cans and it'll say 2.5 or even 3 sometimes. So all of a sudden, there's a big difference between 20 grams of carbs and 60 plus grams of carbs. So that's a good example of immediately starting in and looking at serving size. That is the first step to reading a food label. Now, I just gave you an example of a food product that is meant to be single serve consumption, all right? Now let's talk a little bit about food products that are meant to be shared. And the second part of understanding understanding serving size is understanding what they actually identify as a serving size. And this is one of the other most common things that people basically overeat with, all right? And I'm going to give you some common examples. So let's start with popcorn. Generally speaking, a serving size of popcorn is 1 cup. So this glass is actually a good example. This is about exactly 1 cup. Have you ever been able to restrict yourself from only eating this much popcorn? No, the answer, right, let's be real, the answer is no. Popcorn, 1 cup is basically a handful. You do a handful of popcorn, and what do? You immediately reach in and grab another handful, and if you're basically like everybody else in America, you're crushing 4 or 5 handfuls of popcorn, which that really means you're eating 4 to 5 times the amount of the serving related to the label, okay? So that is a very, very important thing, guys, to be very, very conscious of. The other one is usually things like fruit. So serving size for fruit are usually a 1/2 cup, and a 1/2 cup is a very small amount, and you need to be careful. So fruit, generally speaking, is good for you and healthy for you, but if you're eating 3 or 4 or 5 times the amount of the serving, the serving size itself, that should clue you into 2 things. Number 1, you need to check yourself with portion size and portion control. And that's kind of really the second thing is I want you to really honestly evaluate, are your portions equal to the serving sizes that are recommended on the food labels? And that is an honesty check, because the reality is for most people, their portion sizes are way, way bigger than the serving size that's on the food label. So those are the first 2 things, guys, off the bat: serving size, portion control, that are very important when it comes to reading food labels. All right, now let's move on to the next thing that's related specific to people living with diabetes, okay? The second thing is understanding on the food label the 2 different lines of total carbohydrate and then a separate line for sugars, all right? And this is really fundamental for successful diabetes management. Total carbohydrate is the number you have to go to. because total carbohydrate is telling you what the total actual amount of carbohydrate is in the food. And be clear, guys, sugar is only one aspect of carbohydrate. So I'm going to give you a classic example, and I'm going to use a very personal example. I talked about this in our live workout a couple minutes ago. I had chicken pesto last night with whole wheat pasta. Now, whole wheat pasta has 3 grams of sugar. And you'll even see on some of the food product marketing, whole wheat pasta will be advertised as low glycemic. So remember, guys, what glycemic, anytime you hear reference to the glycemic index, it's talking about time, the amount of time that a food will take to become glucose in your blood. And sugars, the actual line item sugars on a food label will definitely raise blood sugar quickly. Those are the carbohydrates that do have a quick impact on your glucose levels. But that does not tell the whole story. And what the whole story is, both glycemic index and glycemic load. So glycemic index is about time, the amount of time that a food takes to become glucose in your blood. Glycemic load is the actual total amount of carbohydrate in a food. So in whole wheat pasta, the glycemic index is very low. There are only 3 grams of sugar. But the carbohydrate load, there are over 40 grams of carbohydrate in one serving size of whole wheat pasta. Okay? That's a big, big difference. So make sure when you're reading food labels, don't get tricked or mistake that, oh, it only has 3 grams of sugar. You have to read the total carbohydrate line. And in the case of whole wheat pasta, 3 grams of sugars, 40 grams of carbohydrate, that is a huge difference. Now, the other thing to put together with whole wheat pasta is serving size. So serving size for whole wheat pasta is a half a cup. Guys, I want you to be real with yourself. I want you to, how small is a half a cup of whole wheat pasta? It's tiny. It's this much pasta. Last night, I ate at least, I would say, 5 times the serving amount. So just put that together. Do the math on that. What's 5 times 40 grams? That's 200 grams of carbohydrate that I consumed. Now, here's what the impact was on my diabetes. I had dinner at around 7:30 p.m. last night, which is actually fairly early for me. Chicken pesto, pasta, and salad. It was delicious. I took fast-acting insulin for it. In fact, I took 11 units of fast-acting insulin, which is actually a pretty large amount of insulin. When I went to bed last night, my glucose level was 90. Great number, right? Pat on the back, great job. I woke up this morning, my glucose level was 272. Now, why did that happen? It has to do with what I just broke down, the difference between glycemic index and glycemic load. So that pasta that I ate had from a timing perspective, was very slow, but from a load perspective was very high. And basically what happened, and you could see it on my continuous glucose monitor, you could just see my number just going up, 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 up. All right? So this is a very, very, very important thing to understand when you're reading labels. Now, we just had a great comment come through from Raj. okay, on YouTube. And guys, I really appreciate these comments. So what Raj just said was, I don't think that people living in India go through food labels at all, okay? Nor do they really understand them. So Raj, that's a great comment. Here's the thing. People in America don't go through food labels, nor do they understand them either. So that phenomenon is not just, local to India. Really, this is why we're talking about this. People all over the world do not understand food labels, and they don't read them either, okay? So this is why we're talking about this, and really the most important foods that I want to encourage you to really read food labels are grains, because grains can have hidden sources of carbohydrate and can have an impact on your diabetes in really, really negative ways if you're not understanding them. And I personally think the removal of grains, and I personally have seen on an anecdotal level, the removal of grains having an enormous reducing and reversing impact on people living with diabetes, right? And the reason why that is because grains are so rich and complex and have such a high carbohydrate load. And people don't realize how many carbohydrates they are consuming when they're eating grains. The other thing is, guys, if you look at the history of humanity, the diagnosis of diabetes, and I'm talking about type 2 diabetes, the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes occurred as far back as ancient Egypt. There is actually hieroglyphic evidence of the diagnosis of diabetes in ancient Egypt. And the way that diabetes was diagnosed in ancient Egypt was through sampling of urine, and specifically documenting the attraction of ants to urine that had elevated sugar levels in it. Because that's how the body naturally excretes excess sugar, is by peeing it out. And the ancient Egyptians were able to diagnose diabetes by observing ants being attracted to urine of a person with high blood sugar levels. Now, what also coincided with ancient Egyptian civilization? The development of grain. Okay, so guys, this is not, I'm just putting things together, okay? You have a civilization that cultivates food and figures out how to store grain. They start making grain available to the population. Next thing you know, ants are attracted to your urine and people have diabetes. It actually is that straightforward. So I just want you to think about that. I want you to think about your consumption of grain and limiting your consumption of grain and seeing how that impacts your diabetes. All right? All right. We got several people who have joined us. Muhammad has joined us. Muhammad, it's great to see you in the app. Muhammad was with me yesterday in that blizzard working out. That was awesome, Muhammad. It was great to have you here. And on Instagram, we've got Emily Ann has joined us. Frank has joined us. Maria has joined us on Facebook. Okay. And a ton of people. Donnie Ray. Dottie, okay, is here in YouTube. And Dottie just shared a very honest thing. So let's talk about that. I can't stop eating bread. All right. Dottie, I appreciate your honesty. So, let's talk about that honest expression and really, really understand ways that you can deal with that. So, the type of bread makes a huge difference. And I don't mean, when I say the type of bread, I don't mean whole wheat versus white. Do not fall, we're talking about food labeling, do not fall for the trick that something says 100% whole wheat. That doesn't mean anything. That literally does not mean anything when it comes to diabetes. The reason when they say that, when they say 100% whole wheat, what they are referring to is none of the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients have been stripped out of the wheat, which is what happens with white bread. Okay, so Wonder Bread, white bread has had the nutrients stripped out of it. When you see the term 100% whole wheat, that's just saying that none of the nutrients have been taken out. But from a diabetes perspective, from a carbohydrate perspective, that doesn't mean anything. Okay? So what I want to encourage you to do is find other breads that don't have the same glycemic load, the glycemic impact and carbohydrate load as wheat-based breads. So what am I talking about? 2 examples right off the bread. Rye. Rye bread, rye grain, is a fundamentally different food source than wheat. And it has a fundamentally different impact on your glucose levels. The second one is sprouted grain. So now this, guys, is really, I want you to look into this. There's bread that's called sprouted grain. And what sprouted, the only place you can find it in the supermarket is in the freezer section. And the reason why that is because sprouted grain bread is actually alive. Okay? It is a perishable item. Okay? And that's why it has to be kept in the freezer. Sprouted grain bread is so much better for you than whole wheat shelf bread. I just want you to Google sprouted grain, and there's a specific brand that I like. It's called Ezekiel bread. Just Google Ezekiel bread, okay? You will thank me later. All right. Now, speaking of shelf life, so an easy way, guys, another thing to basically steer you when it comes to food labeling is stay away from foods that live on the shelf and try and really focus your food consumption on perishable items. Food that are on the outside of the grocery stores, okay, the outside aisles, things that have to be kept refrigerated or frozen, okay, those are going to be much healthier for you. Those are going to have a lot more vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. All right, now, the last thing that I'm going to break down, and you know what, guys, we're going to talk about this more. This is actually a very important topic, and we are already 25 minutes into this talk, and we could really, really go on for quite a bit longer. So we're not going to do that, but we are going to visit this subject again. And what I want to kind of dial it back for a second is understanding that there are difference between macronutrients and micronutrients. So macronutrients are foods, macronutrients are nutrients that you can use for energy, caloric energy purposes. What that means is you can burn them for energy. And they are specifically fat, protein, carbohydrate. Those are your macronutrients. And the reason why they're put together is because you can store them, number one. And number two, you can use them as caloric sources of energy in the real time and at a later time through stored through storage processes, okay? Generally speaking, if you're an adult, if you have type 2 diabetes, if you have pre-diabetes, and even if you have type 1 diabetes and you're an adult, you probably are consuming too many macronutrients. Now, you may have heard there's all kinds of information out there from the fitness community that tells you to keep track of your macronutrients and you need to be cycling your macros and all that stuff. But the reality is, guys, for most of us, we are eating too many macronutrients and not eating enough micronutrients. So what's the difference? So micronutrients are vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, things that your body needs to perform effectively but cannot use as a caloric energy source. Things like vitamin A, vitamin B, vitamin D, vitamin C, potassium, magnesium, iron. There's a whole list of them. I want you to become familiar with them, okay? But I'm going to point out two specific ones that are relevant to diabetes. And the first one is chromium, okay? So what chromium does is it works with insulin. It is actually a mineral that enhances the use of insulin, or the effectiveness of insulin, I should say, and it helps insulin to make your body absorb blood sugar. So the first thing from a diabetes perspective, you're talking about minerals, look into your chromium consumption. And that is something that's easy to do, and you can determine pretty quickly. It's like, wow, am I consuming any chromium? All right? And I want you to Google what your recommended presence of chromium is. Now, generally speaking, and you can look this up, okay, the sources of chromium come from whole grains, meat, nuts, and seeds. So, right then and there is an opportunity for making the right choice. I would not recommend getting, if you have low chromium levels, I would recommend replenishing them through nuts and seeds. As long, obviously, if you're allergic to nuts, that's not true, but if you can, replenishing these nutrients through nuts and seeds is going to be a much, much healthier option for you than through whole grain and meat. All right? The second one, very, very important to understand, is iron. Okay? Iron, what iron does is iron is key for the transmission and carrying of oxygen through your blood. All right? And if you have a deficiency in iron, okay, if you have a deficiency in iron, that'll cause a lack of energy. You will feel low energy. And that's called anemia. So that's a very well-known deficiency issue. When you bring your iron levels up, you're not burning that, and you start to feel better and your energy comes back, you're not burning calories from that iron. You're just literally bringing the balance in your blood and enabling the better carrying of oxygen in your blood. Now, here's the thing. What I want to recommend to you is there are many, many different ways to get iron into your body. The most commonly known one is through red meat. And don't make that mistake, guys, of thinking that the only way I can increase iron in my body is through the consumption of red meat, because the consumption of red meat is basically not healthy for you. If you are over the age of 18, really, okay, but certainly if you are over the age of 30, the consumption of red meat on a daily basis or even a weekly basis has so many other negative health consequences. So if you're concerned about increasing the presence of iron in your body, dark green leafy vegetables, dark green leafy vegetables contain not only the iron that you need, but they also contain protein. All right? And yes, Sue, you're so right on. Spinach is the best source of iron. So increasing your protein consumption is certainly, guys, an important thing, but don't make the mistake of thinking that the increased protein consumption, increased protein comes exclusively through the consumption of animal flesh. That's actually not the case. And the reality is protein itself comes from plants. That is the reality. Protein itself comes from plants, and there are all kinds of plant-based and grain-based, okay, sources of protein and sources of these micronutrients that we're talking about that basically can enable you to get your macronutrient levels where they need to be, make sure you're consuming enough protein, although I want to caution everybody, just to throw out a little statistic, everybody, basically Americans, just generally speaking, consume about twice as much protein as they actually need. So just be conscious and aware of that, okay? Americans in general consume about twice as much protein as they need, all right? Having said that, there are great ways to get protein in your body. Now, I want to end with this, guys, okay? Spinach, I love spinach. Let me end like this, okay? There is a reason why Popeye eats spinach, okay? Spinach is one of the most incredible, it's a superfood of superfoods. Spinach contains more vitamins, more minerals that your body needs than almost any other food source. And when you combine the fact that spinach has loads of chlorophyll, and remember guys, what chlorophyll is? Chlorophyll is plant blood. And when you compare plant blood chlorophyll with human blood, they are, from a biochemistry perspective, identical except for one thing. Chlorophyll is built around a molecule of magnesium. Human blood is built around a molecule of iron, but every single thing else about them is identical. When you consistently consume chlorophyll in high levels, it has the effect of blood transfusion, okay? And I want to encourage you, you know, I talk about green juicing so much. Spinach-based green juicing, kale-based green juicing, okay? Swiss chard-based green juicing will change your life, okay? And on that note, guys, I really, really want to encourage you, use the source of information that are available to you. We had a ton of great questions and comments today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Guys, I cannot wait to see you in the GlucoSezone. If you haven't downloaded GlucoSezone app, do it right now. I can't wait to see your success. Great job.